Prejudice against Exu and Pomba Gira doesn't come out of nowhere. It has been cultivated over generations, rooted in fear and ignorance. When it comes to offerings like beer, many immediately associate it with something negative. Why? Because the collective imagination has been shaped by external influences, especially religious movements like Prejudice. The lack of knowledge leads to rushed judgments. Who hasn't heard that beer, for example, is a vulgar drink, but this idea was more a result of prejudice and lack of understanding than a spiritual reality. When Zelio began practicing Umbanda, he brought with him this resistance, this fear. The association of these entities with hell was reinforced by a long history of Christian doctrines that did not understand the complexity of African deities. To many of these traditions, any force that didn't conform to European decided to act. In a desperate move, he attempted to assassinate the Pope, believing that only through this act could injustice end. However, the plan failed. As punishment, he was bricked alive in the depths of the Vatican, his voice silenced forever, just like the cries of the enslaved he tried to defend. After this event, the Church began to shape its narratives even more to maintain its power. It was in this, and that's a lesson that remains powerful even today. Fear of the unknown can make us demonize what we don't understand. Have you ever thought about how many times stories like these have been changed to serve bigger interests? What do we lose when we demonize figures that actually represent our own search for answers? Exu is one of the most powerful and misunderstood figures in Afro-Brazilian religions like Quimbanda. Shouldn't be offered to a spiritual entity. This distorted view comes from an attempt to moralize African and indigenous customs, something reinforced during the colonial period and later by the strong presence of the Catholic Church in Brazil. However, those who truly understand the essence of Exu and Pomba Gira know that these offerings carry deep symbolism, not just to please the entities, but to create a bridge, a channel of communication. Pomba Gira. In the Kardecist view, the spirits manifesting through these entities were considered backward, seen as inferior and even dangerous. Zelio, like many of his time, grew up with this view, believing that Exu and Pomba Gira were hellish beings, disciples of the devil, associated with evil, as objects, without rights, without dignity, just bodies to be used. This distortion of Lucifer's image was strategically created to instill fear and control the masses. What was once seen as a figure associated with knowledge and light was turned into the embodiment of evil. By associating Lucifer with absolute evil, the Church created an invisible enemy, one against whom everyone should fight. But in doing so, it also justified its own cruel actions, such as the enslavement of entire peoples. This blending of mystical figures into one entity served to create a clear symbol of everything the Church deemed wrong or dangerous. But if we look at the oldest scriptures, we see that Lucifer was not a fallen angel, much less a demon. In fact, he was just a metaphor, used to represent knowledge and the light of wisdom. The word Lucifer comes from the Latin lux, light, and fere, to bring, meaning the bringer of light, the illuminator, feared and misunderstood. This reinforced prejudice and created a barrier between people and the true Afro-Brazilian spiritual traditions. Have you ever wondered how often what we see on TV completely distorts the meaning of something? What could we learn if we looked at Exu through the eyes of wisdom, instead of fear, between the material and spiritual worlds? Picture this. You're at a crossroads, the symbolic place of Exu. You feel the wind pass, a dense yet fluid energy around you. You place the beer there, and at that moment, it's not just a simple drink being offered. It's a request for open paths, clarity, and justice. Exu, known for his strength and energy of movement, doesn't judge what is right or wrong by human standards. He understands the language of intentions, of energies, desires, the need for protection and justice. And just like Zelio, many only understood the greatness of these entities once they put aside their prejudices and began to see them with an open heart. So, have you ever wondered how many times you've associated something or someone with evil simply because you didn't fully understand it? This is Zelio's lesson. Understanding and acceptance often come only after we overcome fear and ignorance. The fear of power that questions, the fear of losing control over souls and minds. While the figure of the Archbishop disappeared into the cold walls of the Vatican, Lucifer, the fallen angel, became the embodiment of evil. Questioning, once seen as a search for truth, was now seen as a direct road to condemnation. Have you ever stopped to think how a story can be distorted over time, not to reveal the truth, but to protect the interests of those in power? Zelio unintentionally reinforced a distorted view that was already being fed by Brazilian society. This denial paved the way for even stronger prejudices against Exu, and the media played a significant role in amplifying this misconception. In Brazilian television, especially in soap operas, Exu began to be portrayed entirely wrong. The figure who should have been the opener of paths, the protector, was now associated with black magic. Pomba Gira, on the other hand, is often seen with the same prejudice. The beer, the cigarette, the red and black clothes. But do all those who criticize truly know the strength and wisdom of this entity? Or is the negative view simply a reflection of a historical attempt to silence feminine freedom and sensuality? Instead of understanding the deep meaning behind these offerings, many prefer to associate Exu and Pomba Gira with evil, with the profane, something that shouldn't be respected. Communication between humans and the Orishas. Pomba Gira, on the other hand, represents femininity, freedom, and empowerment. They work in favor of balance and justice, demystifying this distorted and demonized view. It's fascinating how fear of the unknown shaped the beliefs of many for so long. The truth is that these entities represent aspects of life that everyone experiences, the crossroads of decisions, repressed. This shift in Lucifer's narrative was no accident. It served to reinforce control over the people, turning any form of questioning into sin, into something that had to be eradicated. Just as the archbishop who dared challenge the established order was silenced, Lucifer, as a symbol of questioning, was demonized. This new version of the story made questioning dangerous, a direct path to damnation, and it's fascinating how, over time, Lucifer became a mirror of the church's own fears, witchcraft, and evil. This dangerous distortion has deeply affected how many people see Exu, creating an unfounded fear and a series of prejudices that continue to this day. The image of Exu, who should be seen as a spiritual guide, was turned into something demonic, further deepening the confusion around his true role. The reality is that Exu is an essential figure for those seeking spiritual connection. He is the one who, in the lack of knowledge and preconception, it's necessary to open the mind to the true power of these entities and what they really represent. And have you ever stopped to think how many times you've judged something without truly understanding its origin and meaning? How many times has beer or any other offering element been wrongly labeled in your mind? How about looking from a different angle and seeing the beauty in what has been distorted? In the 15th century, the Catholic Church faced great challenges in maintaining its control over a changing world. Amid the conquests and exploration of new territories, something dark began to emerge, the justification for the slave trade. And during this time, the figure of Lucifer, once seen as the bearer of light, was transformed into something much more sinister. The Church needed an explanation to dehumanize the people being captured and sold as commodities. Connection between Lucifer and these Canaanite gods like Baal came from the need to create common enemies for the moral compass of the time. Mixing everything into a cauldron of terror helped the Church consolidate its power, turning the unknown into pure evil. Baal, for instance, was a deity worshipped by the Canaanites related to fertility and the weather, but opens the paths of life, who brings movement and transformation. When someone offers something to Exu, they are not seeking evil. They are asking for balance, justice, and protection. Unfortunately, the media distorted this image, turning one of the most complex and powerful Orishas into something. Demonize, the founder of Umbanda, came from a background deeply influenced by Cardicism, where any entity linked to earthly forces was viewed with great suspicion, especially Exu and Pomba Gira. In the Cardicist view, the spirits manifesting through these entities were considered backward, seen as inferior and even dangerous. Zelio, like many of his time, grew up with this view, believing that Exu and Pomba Gira were hellish beings, disciples of the devil, associated with evil. Thus, a cruel decree was established. Blacks and indigenous people had no soul. This decree wasn't just a meaningless phrase. It became one of the moral foundations that justified centuries of exploitation and suffering. The Church, which should have been a symbol of compassion and faith, became one of the main supporters of slavery, turning human trafficking into something acceptable in the eyes of society. The idea that entire peoples had no soul allowed them to be treated. The Jews, and later for the Christians, he was demonized and transformed into an archetype of evil. Likewise, Beelzebub, with roots in Philistine beliefs, was associated with the Lord of the Flies, a representation of corruption and decay. Asmodeus, who has a history in Persian mythology, was seen as one of the most dangerous demons of lust. And suddenly, all these figures were mixed with Lucifer, creating an image of a single, supreme demon, responsible for all the world's evil. But this idea was more a result of prejudice and lack of understanding than a spiritual reality. When Zelio began practicing Umbanda, he brought with him this resistance, this fear. The association of these entities with hell was reinforced by a long history of Christian doctrines that did not understand the complexity of African deities. To many of these traditions, any force that didn't conform to European moral and religious religious standards was automatically linked to evil. By denying the humanity of blacks and indigenous people, the church not only perpetuated slavery, but also marked generations with prejudices that survive to this day. This distorted narrative was used to maintain power and wealth, and anyone who questioned this view was quickly silenced or condemned as a heretic. History was manipulated to justify domination, and the true darkness wasn't in Lucifer, but in the hearts of those who used faith to oppress. His use as a symbol of evil came much later, when the church needed clear villains for its stories. What's most interesting is that by distorting Lucifer's figure, society ended up moving away from the true message of the pursuit of knowledge and enlightenment that this figure once represented. Instead of a fallen angel, Lucifer was the symbol of curiosity, the search for truth, one who didn't accept things as they were and sought more. Thus, Exu and Pomba Gira, connected to the earth, daily life, and human desires, were misunderstood. However, over time and through spiritual practice, Zélio and many others began to realize that Exu and Pomba Gira were not evil entities. Quite the opposite. They are guardians, protectors, and intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. Exu, for example, is the one who opens paths, facilitating communication between humans and the Orishas. Pomba Gira, on the other hand, have you ever wondered how many times stories are distorted to favor those in power? And how many times do we accept these narratives without questioning what's really behind them? Imagine an archbishop in the heart of the Vatican who could no longer bear to see the suffering caused by slavery. He believed that the church, with all its power, should be a symbol of justice and freedom, not a pillar of oppression. But when he realized that the Pope himself supported this cruel system, he, Mbanda and Candomblé, he is the guardian of paths, the one who bridges the spiritual and material worlds. In these traditions, Exu plays a crucial role, often seen as answering directly to Archangel Lucifer. But here, Lucifer is not the Christian devil, but an entity associated with knowledge and light. Exu, therefore, is responsible for regulating energy and matter in the universe, maintaining the balance between the physical and the spiritual. He is not evil, represents femininity, freedom, and empowerment. They work in favor of balance and justice, demystifying this distorted and demonized view. It's fascinating how fear of the unknown shaped the beliefs of many for so long. The truth is that these entities represent aspects of life that everyone experiences, the crossroads of decisions, repressed desires, the need for protection and justice. And just like Zélio, many only understood the greatness of these entities once they put context that Lucifer's story began to change drastically. What was once just a symbol of rebellion and questioning became associated with absolute evil. Lucifer, the light-bearer, who according to some traditions had been an angel who questioned God, was now seen as the enemy of the church. His name was banished from Christianity and became synonymous with everything forbidden and dangerous. He represents movement and transformation. Zélio de Moraes, the founder of Umbanda, was heavily influenced by Kardecism, and this had consequences. He believed Exu had no place in Umbanda, viewing him as a backward spirit, a clear reflection of prejudices brought by Catholicism and European doctrines. By denying Exu's existence, aside their prejudices and began to see them with an open heart. So have you ever wondered how many times you've associated something or someone with evil simply because you didn't fully understand it? This is Zélio's lesson. Understanding and acceptance often come only after we overcome fear and ignorance. Zélio de Moraes, the founder of Umbanda, came from a background deeply influenced by Kardecism, where any entity linked to earthly forces was viewed with great suspicion, especially Exu. Confusion between Lucifer and other entities like Baal, Beelzebub, and Asmodeus is one of those distortions that crossed centuries, fueled by fear and lack of understanding. Lucifer was originally seen as the light bringer, a being associated with knowledge and enlightenment, but over time, especially in Hermetic schools and the conspiratorial interpretations of the Illuminati, this figure was twisted. Moral and religious standards was automatically linked to evil. Thus, Exu and Pomba Gira, connected to the earth, daily life, and human desires, were misunderstood. However, over time and through spiritual practice, Zélio and many others began to realize that Exu and Pomba Gira were not evil entities. Quite the opposite. They are guardians, protectors, and intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. Exu, for example, is the one who opens paths, facilitating